Hello, my name is Kaylin, and 12 years ago, I was handed a check, a one-way ticket, and a warning to disappear. The woman who gave it to me was supposed to become my family. Instead, she looked me in the eye, pregnant, shaking, and said, "Take the money, leave, and stay gone." I left, and no one ever looked for me, until last week, when I saw her again, living under a bridge. What happens when the person who erased you is the one who now needs to be seen? And what would you do if your child, the one they tried to erase too, started asking questions you've spent 12 years avoiding? Would you finally answer them? Or would you disappear all over again? The floor always smelled like lemon polish. I remember that more than the marble itself. The scent, not the shine. That morning, my heels tapped too loud in the Marchand Estate foyer, and my palms wouldn't stop sweating. I was 20. My heart was stupid and swollen with hope. They had called it a discussion, this meeting with Eveline Marchand. But it felt more like a summons. I kept smoothing my dress, rehearsing polite ways to say I loved her son, and the baby growing inside me wasn't a mistake. She arrived exactly on time, as if she choreographed punctuality into her DNA. No handshake, no smile, just cool grace wrapped in a navy wool coat that cost more than my entire semester's tuition. She didn't sit. Instead, she reached into her designer handbag and laid a cream envelope on the glass table between us. No preamble, no eye contact. Take them, leave, and stay gone. I stared at her, confused at first. Maybe it was a job offer, or housing support, something kind. But when I opened the envelope, my fingers trembled. A $250,000 cashier's check. 2 first-class one-way tickets to New York. I couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. Dorian doesn't know you're doing this." My voice sounded small, stupid. She tilted her head just enough to make me feel like a problem she'd already solved. "He's in Chicago. I made sure." I felt the world tilt under me, like I'd stepped off a curb that wasn't there. "But he loves me," I said, almost whispering. He said he wanted—" She cut in. "He said a lot of things. Boys that age do. But this family has standards. We can't have our name diluted." Diluted. That was the word she used for my pregnancy. For me. I opened my mouth to argue, to fight, but the sharpness in her gaze made it clear. There was no space for emotion in this room. This wasn't a conversation. It was a transaction. The cab ride from La Jolla back to my tiny apartment was a blur of raindrops and stomach cramps. My body felt foreign, like it belonged to someone who had trusted too much. I clutched the envelope in my lap and stared at the check. My name already printed. My worth decided. I tore it in half in the elevator before I got to my floor. Then I sat on the kitchen floor and cried into a damp towel for an hour straight. The next morning, I packed everything I could fit into one suitcase. Clothes that no longer fit. A prenatal vitamin bottle. Dorian's sweatshirt, which still smelled like him. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I didn't write a note. I just boarded the plane. The seat next to me was empty the whole way to New York. So was my chest. Queens was not kind to me. The apartment I found was small and noisy. The heater never worked. There was a mouse I named Melvin just to make it less terrifying when he ran across the kitchen tiles. But it was safe. It was quiet enough to write. So I wrote. I wrote to Dorian every Sunday, sometimes twice a week. I told him about my cravings. About the day I nearly fainted on the subway. About the first time I heard our baby's heartbeat. I told him I missed him. That I didn't want money. Just a call. A chance to explain. I mailed the letters to the Marchand estate. No response. I started sending them to his college address. Still nothing. Maybe he really didn't want to hear from me. Maybe she was right. I gave birth alone in a public hospital during a snowstorm. No one held my hand. No one cut the cord but the nurse. I named him Jace. Short, strong, easy to say. That first night, I stayed awake in the stiff hospital bed with him on my chest. He was warm and smelled like soap and new beginnings. I traced the bridge of his nose and whispered, "He'll know the truth one day." The look in her eyes hadn't changed. Still sharp, still cold, still pretending she didn't know me, when we both knew she did. Eveline Marchand, once the queen of social galas and charity boards, now sat hunched beneath the highway overpass like a forgotten ghost. She didn't speak, neither did I. I stepped back slowly, my fingers clutching Jace's backpack straps tighter than necessary. He didn't see her. I wasn't ready for him to. Not yet. That night, back at the motel, I barely slept. The air conditioner rattled nonstop, drowning out most thoughts, but not all of them. At 2 a.m., I got up, poured a paper cup of lukewarm water, and watched my son sleep. He looked too much like Dorian. That same soft jaw, same dark lashes. Sometimes I forgot how young 12 really was. The next morning, while packing his things for the scholarship orientation, Jace bent down to grab a sweatshirt from under the bed and pulled out something else. "Mom!" he called out, holding up a wooden box I'd thought I'd buried deep enough. My chest tightened. He flipped it open, casually at first, then slower. Inside lay the torn check, the faded plane ticket, and the sonogram picture that still had my name scribbled in the corner. I didn't say anything at first, just stood frozen by the bathroom door. He turned the check over, reading the name, Eveline Marchand. "Why do you still have these?" I stepped into the room slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Because I need to remember why I left." He didn't ask more, but his silence wasn't passive, it was observant. He was connecting dots. At noon, we headed to the scholarship venue, located in a sleek, mirrored building off the coast. The wind coming off the water, bit colder than I expected for Southern California. I kept my hood pulled up, my sunglasses low. Jace, meanwhile, bounced beside me, pointing at the Marchand Foundation banners like they were trophies. "Mom, look! That's the turbine project from last year's winner." I nodded, offering a weak smile. "Looks impressive." Inside, the staff handed us welcome packets and name tags. I wrote Kaylin Hartley on mine, with a marker that bled slightly into the sticker. For a moment, I wondered if anyone in this room would recognize that name. Probably not. I'd been scrubbed clean from their records years ago. After a short info session, we stepped outside for lunch. Jace wanted tacos from a food truck parked by the sidewalk. I stood off to the side while he waited in line, eyes scanning everything and nothing. That's when I saw her again. At the edge of the overpass, half in shadow, half exposed to the sun, sat the same woman from yesterday. She had her cart, a blanket, plastic bags tied like knots around her ankles for warmth. No sign, no cup for change. Just watching. Eveline. She didn't beg, she didn't flinch, just stared at the world like it owed her something and had forgotten the debt. I turned away fast, heart pounding, but it wasn't fast enough. Our eyes had locked for a split second, and in that second, something passed between us. Recognition, regret, or maybe just calculation. We ate lunch on a bench a few yards away. Jace chatted about his interview prep while I nodded and kept glancing over his shoulder. "Mom, are you even listening?" "I am," I said, forcing my eyes back to him. "I'm just thinking about logistics. You'll do great." That night, while Jace showered, I stared at the contents of that wooden box again. I hadn't meant for him to see it, but maybe it was time. I pulled out the sonogram, traced the blurry shape of his curled-up form. The last time I'd looked at that photo, I was sitting alone in a Queen's hospital bed, cradling a future no one wanted me to have. Now he was standing tall in the mirror, brushing his teeth. My son was thriving, despite it all. When he came out of the bathroom, hair still damp, he asked quietly, "Did he ever see that?" I didn't need clarification. He meant Dorian. "No," I said. "He never did." Jace looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." Just one word, but heavy. The next morning, the scholarship finalists were scheduled for a group tour of the local STEM campus. I walked Jace to the shuttle, kissed the top of his head, and turned to walk back to the motel. But something stopped me, a gut pull, a whisper from the past. Instead of going back, I turned and headed toward the shelter a few blocks from the overpass. A volunteer at the counter greeted me, asking if I was looking to register for a spot. I shook my head. I'm looking for someone. She's older, white hair, blue eyes. I think her name is Evelyn. The woman frowned. No names here, ma'am, but we can let you check the cafeteria. She pointed toward a door on the right. I thanked her and stepped inside. The room was warm, lined with long tables and the scent of overcooked peas. I scanned the faces. Most didn't look up. A few muttered to themselves. Then I spotted her, far in the back, eating quietly. Her hands shook slightly as she spooned soup into her mouth. Still proud, still poised in her way, even in worn shoes and a tattered scarf. I walked past her table, placing a paper napkin and a slice of cornbread beside her tray. She paused. Her eyes lifted. They met mine. For a split second, her gaze drifted to the necklace around my neck, the one Dorian gave me years ago. She stared at it like it had thorns. She didn't speak, neither did I. But we both knew who I was. But I know that face, and I know that kind of looking away. It's how she dismissed my entire existence 12 years ago, with silence, not screaming. The next morning, I barely touched the hotel breakfast. Jace scarfed down a banana and one of those stale muffins wrapped in plastic, not sensing the storm roiling inside me. He was humming something under his breath while checking his name badge for the orientation session. He had no idea I'd seen Evelyn again, that she was still here, still capable of pretending I never existed. We walked to the Martian Foundation Center together. The coastal air had that California mix of salt and citrus, but it didn't clear my head. Not today. Jace spotted his group near the front desk and waved before hurrying off. I stood off to the side, watching, hands stuffed in my coat pockets. That's when I noticed her. Sleek ponytail, sharp blazer, icy smile. Isolde Marchand. She spotted me before I had a chance to disappear. With the same elegance her mother wielded like a sword, she glided across the floor and stopped within arm's reach. "Kaylin," she said coolly. "How quaint. Still using the same last name, I see." I didn't flinch. "Still defending a legacy built on lies, I see." Isolde handed me a white envelope. "You'll want to read this carefully. It's not just your future you're toying with anymore." I took it without opening it. No greeting, no fake hug. Not even a, "How's the kid?" She arched a brow. "You should be careful what you say around people who write checks." As she turned to walk away, I called after her, calm but firm. "Tell your mother I'm not 17 anymore." I didn't open the envelope until I was back in the hotel room. I knew what it would be, but the confirmation still sent heat up my spine. A revised non-disclosure agreement. A printed reminder of the clause I'd never actually signed, but that they'd insisted existed. A bold line: "If you speak to the press or my brother, the scholarship will be rescinded." They were still playing the same game, but I wasn't the same girl. That evening, while I folded laundry and tried to act normal, Jace sat quietly at the small desk, his tablet propped up with an awkward lean. He was unusually still, tapping occasionally, but not speaking. When I turned around to check on him, he didn't look up. "Mom," he said, "is this you?" He spun the screen toward me. An old blog post, barely formatted, tucked into an archive page. Someone had commented anonymously beneath it. The heir's girlfriend was paid off to disappear, and she did. I stared at the words, my throat dry. Jace looked up, eyes wide, cautious. "Was that you?" I sat down across from him. For the first time in a long time, I didn't try to redirect or sugarcoat. "Yes." He didn't ask anything else at first. He just nodded once and stood, walked into the bathroom. The door clicked shut. I didn't follow. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I walked over and gently knocked. "Jace?" Silence. "Please talk to me." He opened the door, eyes red but dry. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired. You always said he didn't want us. But what if he never knew? The question landed like a punch. I couldn't speak. My jaw clenched against the weight of everything I'd carried for years. I wanted to explain, but nothing would fit in a single sentence. Jace walked past me, grabbed his hoodie, and left the room. I followed him out into the hallway, down the stairwell. I didn't run after him. I just kept enough distance that he'd know I was there. He stopped at the second-floor landing, sat on the cold concrete steps. I sat one step below, letting him speak first. I Googled him last year, you know, he said quietly. I didn't tell you. I wanted to know. I kept my eyes on the railing. And what did you find? Pictures, speeches. He's everywhere, Mom. He's some big-time investor now. People think he's amazing. I stayed quiet. He has a family foundation named after his mother, the same woman who gave you that check. I sighed. I didn't want you to grow up with bitterness. I didn't want your childhood to revolve around a man who may have walked away. Or worse, been lied to. His voice cracked. He's my dad. I deserve to know the truth. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the fight in his eyes. Not the tantrum of a boy. The clarity of a child who had grown enough to ask the right questions. And I knew then, there was no more protecting him from this. And he does. But I'm not ready to give it all. Not yet. I need to face one more ghost before I open that door. After our talk, Jace went to bed early. He didn't slam the door or make a scene. That's how I knew it cut deep. When he didn't argue, just shut down. I stayed up past midnight, pacing from one side of the room to the other, sipping tea I never finished. By morning, the weight on my chest hadn't lifted. If anything, it had grown heavier. Jace had left early with the other scholarship finalists on a field tour, eager to keep moving forward. I, on the other hand, stood still, glued to everything that had never been resolved. I couldn't lie to him again, but to give him the truth, I had to stare it down myself. After breakfast, I left the hotel and walked back toward the edge of the neighborhood we'd driven through 2 days ago. It wasn't far from the Martian Gala site, but it felt like a separate world. The part of town polished donors didn't see, where the streets were cracked and the shade from the overpass never quite felt safe. I spotted the shelter 2 blocks down. The signage was faded, and a line had already started forming near the front. I approached the side entrance and told the woman at the desk that I wanted to volunteer, just for the lunch shift. Gave her a fake name and thanked her quickly. Inside, I tied on an apron and took a position at the serving line. It was quiet, except for the shuffle of feet and the low hum of small conversations. Some men nodded politely. A few women offered tired smiles, but most eyes didn't linger. I scanned the line while ladling soup, face after face, until I saw her, Eveline. She sat alone in the back corner, near the window, her tray barely touched. 3 layers of mismatched coats wrapped around her frame. The scarf covering her hair didn't hide how white it had turned. But her posture? Still proud. Still pulled tight like an unspoken warning. I excused myself from the line and picked up a small plate with a slice of cornbread. Walked it across the room, placed it silently next to her tray. She didn't look up. At first. But then, as I turned to walk away, her eyes lifted. And landed not on my face, but on the necklace hanging around my neck. The necklace Dorian gave me on my 19th birthday. Her eyes fixed on it. No words, no gasp. But something shifted. Recognition? Disdain? Maybe both. I didn't stop. I walked out of that room with my head held higher than it had been in years. Not because I'd won, but because I knew, without a doubt, she hadn't forgotten me. And she knew I wasn't gone. Back at the hotel, I found Jace curled up on the bed with my laptop open beside him. He was watching one of those old Martian Foundation clips, some gala from years ago, the kind where donors clap and children sing, and nothing real gets said. He paused it as I walked in, turned slowly to face me. "If you're not ready to tell me everything, I'll figure it out myself." There was no malice in his voice, just quiet determination. I sat on the edge of the bed. "Then let's find out together." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. We spent the next few hours scrolling through articles, watching videos, reading press releases. We made notes, paused footage. Jace was methodical, and I could see Dorian in him more with every minute. The focus, the calm. We took a break around 5 p.m. The sun had started slipping low, casting long beams across the carpet. I got up to make tea. Jace stayed staring at the screen. "She doesn't look like someone who lives under a bridge," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He clicked play again. On the screen, Evelyn stood at a podium, dressed in emerald silk, her voice strong and elegant. "The Marchand legacy isn't about money or power," she said, smiling into the crowd. "It's about integrity, family, responsibility." I laughed. Just once. It wasn't funny. It was infuriating. Jace muted the video. He didn't say anything, just leaned his head on my shoulder. That moment, silent, heavy, unspoken, meant more than any apology I'd ever been owed. The world outside that hotel room hadn't changed, but something inside it had. And maybe that was enough to begin again. Public personas are so clean, so rehearsed. But truth? Truth leaves stains, even on designer suits. After the video ended, Jace didn't say much. He just sat there for a while, staring at the screen, jaw tight. I let the silence stay. Sometimes that's where the shift happens. Not in the yelling, not in the tears, but in the stillness. The next day, he left early with the other scholarship finalists for a tour of the university's lab facilities. He'd packed his bag the night before, triple-checked his name tag, and skipped breakfast, which for him was unusual. I offered him a protein bar and a quick squeeze on the shoulder. He didn't pull away, but he didn't look back either. With the morning to myself, I walked to a small cafe near the event center and sat by the window, nursing a bitter cup of over-roasted coffee. I tried reading the paper, scrolling headlines, pretending to be any other mom with a free morning. But every time someone in a suit walked by, my shoulders tensed. I wasn't sure if they worked for the foundation or were just rich enough to blend in. After a while, I threw the cup away half full and took a walk through the plaza behind the Marchand building. The fountain in the middle still had a plaque with Evelyn's name on it. A tribute to quiet strength and unshakable values. Funny. The woman I saw under that bridge didn't look quiet or strong. She looked abandoned. But maybe that's what made her dangerous now. She had nothing left to lose. I rounded a hedge and stopped short. There they were. Jace was standing by a bench, his hands at his sides, frozen in an awkward half-step. Across from him sat Evelyn. Her hair was tucked beneath a faded scarf, and her coat looked like it had been donated 3 winters ago. She was holding something out to him. A candy bar. My heart pounded as I walked closer, carefully staying behind a group of tourists so they wouldn't notice me. Jace hadn't taken it yet, but he hadn't walked away either. He was polite, of course he was. He didn't know who she was. I cut across the lawn, closing the distance in seconds. "Jace," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come here." He turned, startled, then confused. "She just offered me—" I snatched the candy bar from his hand, dropped it straight into the trash can beside the bench, and turned to Evelyn. "You erased his mother," I said quietly, so no one else would hear. "You don't get to reach for him now." Her mouth opened slightly. For a second, I saw something that looked like sadness flash across her face. But I didn't care. "You built a kingdom on silence," I added, eyes locked on hers. "Let it rot without us." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She just sat back on the bench and looked away. Again. I turned to Jace. "Let's go." He followed without a word. We walked in silence down the sidewalk. When we reached the main road, he spoke up. "Who was that woman?" I hesitated, then said, "Someone who chose her image over her own family." He nodded slowly, chewing on that answer the way he used to chew on questions about death or war, things too big for one conversation. At the corner, we stopped at a crosswalk. The light changed. We walked. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. We didn't talk about her. We didn't mention the candy. But the air between us had changed. It wasn't just my secret anymore. That night, back in the hotel room, I was folding laundry on the bed while Jace played something muted on his tablet. I was just about to switch off the lamp when my phone buzzed. Unknown sender. No subject. Just a link with the message, "You should have seen this. They didn't want you to." I stared at the screen for a second, thumb hovering over the play icon. "Jace," I said quietly, "can you pause that?" He did. I clicked. The video loaded. It was grainy, clearly not edited. The file name read, Marchand, Scholarship, Initial Interview, 02. And there we were. Jace, 11 years old at the time, sitting beside me in a too big blazer. I had my hair pinned back, nervous smile on my face. I remembered that day, the first round of scholarship interviews. We'd driven all night to make it on time. He'd practiced his presentation in the car. The video showed us talking together, him explaining his project, me chiming in when the interviewer asked about his support system. "He's always been curious," I said on screen. "We used to build small turbines out of cereal boxes. He once rewired a toaster just to see if he could toast bread faster." They laughed. I laughed. And then the footage glitched. Jumped. When it resumed, I was gone. Only Jace's solo footage remained, the official one I'd seen on the website. I looked at him. He looked at me. "They cut you out," he said flatly. I nodded. They always do. 2 hours later, a knock on the hotel door. A man in a suit hands me an envelope and walks away. He didn't say a word, not a glance. Just handed it over like it was a pizza order and disappeared into the hallway. I locked the door behind him and stood there for a beat, the weight of the envelope suddenly heavier than it should have been. Jace looked up from the couch where he was half dozing, the remnants of a snack still on the table in front of him. "What's that?" "I'm about to find out," I said, sitting down at the table, fingers tracing the sealed edge. I broke the seal slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted time to think, to breathe, to not give this envelope any more power than it already had. Inside was a printed version of the scholarship application, the original one, except something had been redacted. Where it once read, "Raised by his mother, Kaylin Hartley," there was now a line that said, "No known parental guardianship." I flipped the page. There was more. An email thread, internal, clearly not meant for me. Notes from the Foundation's PR team. One line caught my eye. Having the mother in the spotlight could undermine the narrative of institutional support, suggest reframing as independent merit. That did it. I pulled out my laptop, opened the portal, and logged into the finalist dashboard. I clicked through to the public-facing page, the one parents and donors could see. No mention of me. No mention of his upbringing. Just vague terms like resilience, self-driven, and exceptional under adversity. They made my son sound like he'd raised himself. Jace had walked over by then. He saw the screen, read the email. He sat down beside me, quiet for a long time. "Why would they lie like that?" he finally asked, voice tight. "Because the truth doesn't sell as well," I said, keeping my voice even. "Because the idea of a single mother doing her best isn't part of their branding." He clenched his jaw. "That's not right." "No, it's not," I said. "But now we have the proof." We didn't speak for the next 20 minutes. We didn't have to. He handed me his phone. "Let's write something. Let's say something back." I opened a blank email draft, addressed it to the Foundation's communications director. I wasn't angry in the way I used to be, not explosive. I was clear, focused, done with being small to keep other people comfortable. I typed, Dear Marchand Foundation Board, I'm writing to formally request a correction regarding the public narrative and documentation attached to my son Jace Hartley's scholarship finalist status. Specifically, the misrepresentation of his upbringing and the erasure of parental involvement is factually inaccurate and emotionally harmful. Attached, you will find a copy of the original interview, which you omitted from your public materials. In it, both I and my son provide clear, documented context of our relationship and history. I request a written acknowledgement of this discrepancy and an immediate correction in your communications. This is not a threat. This is not a media play. This is a call for accountability from a mother who has stayed silent long enough. Sincerely, Kaylin Hartley. I read it aloud to Jace. He nodded once, firmly. Send it, so I did. And for a moment, it felt like something shifted. Not in the world, but inside me. I leaned back, closed the laptop, and exhaled. But peace is a fleeting thing when you're up against people who've never known consequences. 2 hours passed. No reply. 3. Jace had fallen asleep on the bed, limbs sprawled, one sock off. I pulled a blanket over him, then turned out the main light. That's when the phone buzzed again. Another email. This time, from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Marchand Files, confidential, no message, just a video attachment. I hesitated. Then I opened it. The footage was rougher than the last one. The audio echoed slightly, but I knew the space. It was the very same conference room we'd sat in during the first round interviews. This was the raw feed. Jace and I sat side by side. He introduced me, said, My mom's the reason I even like science. I laughed nervously, saying, He taught me as much as I taught him. Then came the moment I hadn't seen before. The interviewer asked, What's been your biggest challenge raising Jace? And I answered, voice low but steady, being told I didn't belong in his story. The interviewer had nodded, but in the final version, that entire section was gone, scrubbed, erased. I turned to my phone, took a screenshot, and saved the file. Then I saved the video, twice, once to the drive, once to a hidden folder, just in case. Because when people have spent this long covering their tracks, they don't go down without a fight. I didn't know who sent it, but I had a feeling someone inside was finally tired of being part of the lie. My hands shook as I set the phone down. Not from fear, from readiness. I thought it was another threat, a more official warning, but when I opened it, I nearly dropped it. The envelope wasn't heavy, but it felt like it carried the weight of a dozen years. Inside was a single document, aged slightly at the edges, but carefully preserved. A notarized agreement. My name. A signature, mine. And a very different set of terms than the ones I remembered being pressured into. No non-disclosure clause, no gag order, no waiver of contact. Just a relocation support agreement. Basic, even generous on the surface. But nothing in this version included the silencing language Evelyn's people had dangled over me back then like a guillotine. I stared at it, breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. A note was paperclipped to the last page. I kept this in case you ever needed to be believed. M.H. Marcus Heller. Her attorney. He'd been in the room when I signed it. Stone-faced, quiet, barely present. I always suspected he had a conscience. Turns out I was right. It took me a few minutes to collect myself. I laid the pages flat on the hotel table and smoothed them with my palms, not unlike how I used to flatten Jace's baby clothes before folding them. Gentle, but deliberate. Across the room, Jace had just come out of the shower, towel over his shoulder. He looked at me, then the document, and walked over. "What is it?" he asked. I handed it to him. He read faster than I thought he would. His eyes moved back and forth, narrowing, jaw tightening with each line. "They lied to you," he said finally, voice low, "and to me." "They lied to protect their name," I replied. He looked up. "Let's ruin that illusion." There was no venom in his voice, no hot anger, just a steady resolve I'd only ever seen once before. when he stood in front of a classmate who was mocking another kid and said, "That's enough." I nodded. Not as a mother, but as someone who now saw her son standing on equal ground. He grabbed his laptop, pulled up his presentation file for the gala event, and started typing. I walked to the mini fridge, poured us both a glass of water, and sat beside him. "What are you doing?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Adding a new slide," he said. "One they won't see coming." He titled it, Invisible Architects. Underneath, he wrote, "This is dedicated to the people behind the scenes, those who were erased to make space for a cleaner story." I didn't touch the keyboard. I didn't correct a single word. Later that night, while he slept, I pulled out my phone and drafted an email to the Marchand Foundation Board. Subject line, Materials submitted to public portal. I wrote, "Dear members of the Marchand Foundation, attached, you'll find the original notarized agreement signed 12 years ago between myself and the legal representative of your family. Contrary to your internal documents and public statements, the attached contract contains no provisions barring contact, disclosure, or association. This misrepresentation not only contradicts the legal reality of my case, but has directly contributed to the erasure of my son's truth, and mine, from every narrative you've built around this year's scholarship. I am not seeking compensation. I am not issuing a threat. I am requesting the opportunity to speak publicly at the gala event, alongside my son, to address the board and our peers directly. If declined, I will pursue other avenues. But I believe in redemption. I believe some truths should be spoken quietly, and some need a microphone. Sincerely, Kaylin Hartley." I attached the agreement, attached the email thread, attached the unedited interview video, triple-checked everything, hit send. Then I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, for the first time in what felt like years. The following morning, my inbox was quiet. No reply. Jace and I got dressed for the gala in silence. I wore the same navy blue dress I had used for job interviews in Austin. He wore a gray suit we'd found on sale 2 weeks ago. It was slightly loose in the shoulders, but he looked taller in it. Older, like he'd grown overnight. As I tied the knot of his tie, his hands fidgeted. "You nervous?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, but not about speaking." "What then?" "That they'll try to pretend again. That they'll smile and shake hands and act like everything's fine." I looked him straight in the eye. "If they do, you'll know the difference now. That's power." We arrived 30 minutes early. The venue was already buzzing with media, staff, and families. We were ushered through the side entrance, past staff who didn't recognize me, or at least pretended not to. Backstage, someone from the board finally approached us. A tall man in his 60s, perfectly groomed, his eyes flicking between us. "You'll each have 90 seconds, he said curtly. "Stick to the science." I smiled. "We plan to. Science, and its foundations." He didn't respond, just walked off. Jace adjusted his tie one last time. He turned to me and whispered, "Let's show them what truth looks like." He didn't look like a child anymore. He looked like clarity, dressed in borrowed confidence, and mine. We stood in the narrow hallway behind the stage, the low murmur of the crowd leaking through the heavy velvet curtain. Jace adjusted the hem of his jacket, while a staff member fiddled with the mic attached to his collar. His fingers twitched slightly, but his face remained composed. I wanted to tell him how proud I was, but he already knew. I'd told him with every lunch packed, every late-night quiz reviewed, every time I bit back the urge to explain what this world would try to do to a boy like him. The announcer's voice echoed from the ballroom speakers, crisp and rehearsed. "And now, our next finalist, Jace Hartley." Polite applause followed. Jace stepped forward, and I followed, just out of the spotlight. The ballroom was a sea of sequins and starched tuxedos. Chandeliers glittered above the audience like frozen applause. Rows of donors, politicians, and board members filled the tables, nodding and smiling without listening. We moved toward the front. He walked past the MC, past the podium, and stopped center stage. The screen behind him flashed his name, along with the Martian Foundation logo. A woman at one of the front tables leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "Is that the kid whose mom left?" I heard it. I let it sit. The announcer read from a card, voice warm. Raised by academic mentors, overcame early life hardship, a shining example of independent perseverance. I felt Jace's spine straighten. He stepped up to the mic. "I wasn't raised by mentors," he said, voice steady. "I was raised by her." He turned and pointed. At me. My breath caught as hundreds of eyes followed his finger, and then fell on me. Me, in my off-the-rack dress, standing just beyond the edge of the lights. Jace reached into his pocket and held up my necklace. The same one Dorian had given me all those years ago. "She built me, but you edited her out of our story." Silence spread through the room like a held breath. No shifting in seats, no coughs, just a stillness so loud it rang in my ears. Phones rose from the tables. I saw flashes. I saw the head of PR mouth something to a staffer. I saw Isolde pale. I saw Evelyn. She was sitting near the back, a borrowed coat over her evening gown, hands clasped tight in her lap. She tried to stand but stumbled and sat back down quickly. No one offered help. Jace continued. "I understand this event is meant to celebrate achievement," he said, "but achievement doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when someone believes in you long before anyone else does, when someone sacrifices without applause, when someone refuses to disappear just because it makes your brochure look better." He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He simply told the truth. "I don't need another certificate," he said. "I need her name back in the story." And then he stepped back. The applause didn't come right away. But when it did, it wasn't polite, it wasn't performative, it was real, messy, uneven, honest. A few people rose to their feet, then more. I didn't move. I stood where I was, hands clenched at my sides, eyes fixed on my son. He looked at me like he always had, but now, everyone else finally did too. After the ceremony, no one stopped us as we walked through the lobby. No one intercepted us with a legal folder. No one handed us a revised script. Eveline sat alone in a corner chair near the exit. Her eyes met mine as we passed. For the first time in 12 years, she didn't look through me. She looked at me. There was no apology in her expression, just something more dangerous, recognition. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Jace reached for my hand. "Did I go too far?" he asked. I shook my head. "You went exactly far enough." It didn't take long after the gala. The articles, the videos. They did what my words never could. Within 48 hours, my phone buzzed more times than it had in the last 3 years combined. Local news segments, blog posts, hashtags. I saw my name floating alongside phrases like "erased mother" and "truth behind the foundation." The Marchand Foundation released a carefully worded statement 2 days later, an apology buried between legalese and diluted phrasing. They called it a regrettable oversight. They clarified miscommunication in editing. They pledged greater transparency moving forward. What they didn't say? That they'd tried to disappear me, twice. Donations slowed. One of their largest sponsors paused funding. I saw a headline in the business section, "When silence isn't strength." I didn't gloat. Not once. I didn't take interviews or reply to the messages asking me to appear on panels or podcasts. I'd already said what mattered. And more importantly, Jace had. 1 week after the gala, a call came from the shelter clinic on the outskirts of the city. A soft voice, gentle but firm, told me that Evelyn was there, declining fast, and that she'd asked for me. I didn't say yes immediately. I sat with the phone in my lap for almost an hour, letting the seconds pass like rain on a windshield. I didn't owe her closure. I didn't owe her anything. But something inside me, something that had once loved the son she raised, wanted to hear the end of her story. So I went. The clinic was small and quiet, not much more than a converted house with linoleum floors and dim lighting. A nurse guided me to the back, where Eveline lay propped up by two thin pillows. She looked smaller, hollowed, like her body had collapsed inward, finally caving beneath the weight of everything she'd built and defended. She didn't open her eyes right away, but when she did, they found me immediately. No surprise, no hesitation, just recognition. I sat down without speaking. For a long moment, there was only the hum of a machine monitoring her breathing. Then she whispered, "You became everything I couldn't." I didn't move. She continued, voice raspy, almost brittle. "I built images. You built a man." She closed her eyes. That was it. No apology, no excuse, just a sentence heavy with everything she could never say. I stood, reached into my bag, and pulled out the necklace Jace had held up at the gala. Dorian's gift. The one Eveline stared at in that shelter cafeteria like it burned her to see it. I placed it on the table beside her bed. Then I turned and walked out. Not because I was done with her, because I was done needing her. That evening, Jace and I walked along the shoreline. The sun was low, casting a golden haze across the water. The waves moved slow and steady, like breath. He kicked a piece of driftwood ahead of him and then turned toward me. "She didn't win, right?" he asked. I smiled. "She never played the right game." He grinned back, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something behind his eyes that wasn't pain or doubt. It was calm. Back in Austin, I reopened the catering business I'd put on hold for too long. Nothing fancy, just honest food made with care, and people who appreciated it. Word got around. Orders came in. I hired 2 part-time helpers. Jace returned to school with a new sense of purpose. Not louder, just clearer. He joined a youth program and began speaking at events. Not about the scholarship, but about truth, representation. How not all parents show up in photos, but that doesn't mean they weren't there. He called them the invisible architects. Once, I stood at the back of the room during one of his talks. A woman beside me wiped her eyes. When it ended, she turned and asked, "Are you his teacher?" I smiled. "No, I'm his mother. The world hasn't changed. People still pretend for cameras, still edit what doesn't fit the brand. But in our little corner of it, something shifted. She's gone, and I didn't need her apology. I just needed my son to see me, fully and finally. Sometimes the people who try hardest to erase us only end up highlighting what they couldn't destroy. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your name, your place, and your truth after being silenced. Maybe you've been written out of someone's version of the story. But what if now is the time to write your own? If this touched you, tell me. Have you ever felt erased by someone who was supposed to protect you? Don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories that dig deep into family, forgiveness, and finding your voice.